So at home, my children, oftentimes after dinner, will be sitting at the table still, and they're trying to talk to me. And quite often I'll take my phone out and I'm doing something, checking emails or whatever. And they'll start talking and I'm not answering quickly because I'm distracted by this guy. And eventually they get, and usually it's Abe that says this, he says, "Phone man, hey phone man." And he's trying to basically say, you're paying more attention to this phone than you are to me. And I'll look up, embarrassed yet again, that I was, focused in on this thing and not on my own flesh and blood. And so I'm guessing y'all have noticed by now that we got all sorts of changes going on this morning temporarily for this purpose. Your worship leader and your crazy senior pastor wanted to take some time to force us to kind of separate from or to avoid as much technology as we can in a church service. And you might think, well, that seems crazy. Why would we want to do that? Because it's my belief that technology has become so integrated into our lives. The word that I would use is ubiquitous. That means it's everywhere you look is technology, and it's so common that we don't even notice it. So the point of today's service is to eliminate that, just to recognize that there was a life before all the technology has invaded our experience. Now, before you worry that I am trying to make us all, like that I love working construction with my Amish friends so much that my hope is that we go back to some prehistoric, no technology land. I'll just tell you right from the jump that I'm not going to say in this service that we need to take your cell phones out afterwards, line them up, and we'll all get sledgehammers and smash them or anything like that. Okay? So if you're worried, I'm not going to say that. In fact, I'm not going to say anything about getting rid of cell phones. But what I do think is that in this sermon series, which is about God enacting or integrating into 100% of our lives, I think that this technology piece is a big thing already, and it's becoming even bigger. And so for us to not think kind of theologically and spiritually about God and technology, we would be missing out on a big part of what is human existence now for all of us, I believe. And so, trust me, I don't come to you as an expert or as someone who's really good in this area. Actually, I come to you as phone man, right? With all of the issues, and my wife and kids could share them with you, in my own personal way of walking through life with technology. But what I feel very compelled to do is to say we need to all stop and we need to reflect on kind of how we're doing this in our journey through life as Christians, really in relation to the technology that is here and is most likely to be coming. I expect to leave you this morning not with very definitive answers for what the next steps are. Instead, what I'm going to leave you with are questions that I've begun to wrestle with, and questions that I want to ask you to join me in wrestling with for how we faithfully walk out our lives as Christians with all the technology that surrounds us. First off, if you're in this room right here, regardless of age or anything, can you just raise your hand for me if you have a smartphone or a cell phone of some sort? And if you have one for work and for whatever, raise two hands, feel free. You can keep up. I want to just get a glimpse. Okay, so everybody look around. It's pretty obvious. You can put it down. It's pretty obvious that these things are everywhere. Is that accurate? Research says, and I don't want to go 8,000 stats on you today, but research says that the average person checks their phone one time every 4.3 minutes that they're awake. One time every 4.3 minutes you're awake, you check your phone. So if you're not checking your phone now, you'll have to catch up like this afternoon or something. It also says that in 2018, the age group of people from 18 to 29 years old, 2018, 18 to 29-year-olds, 45, about half of them, said that they were online almost constantly. Almost constantly online, half people in that age group. And in just a few short years from now, that age group are going to be our 80-year-olds. And so what's going to happen from them on down related to kind of how we live as humans in this world in relationship to technology? Seems like a big deal to me. Over 1 billion people, that's billion with a B, 1 billion people check Facebook daily. Now, if you're like 20 or younger and you think Facebook's just for old people, that means that that's not even including them who are on the gram or Snapchat or whatever. But 1 billion people for about 50 minutes a day are on Facebook. Okay, like I said, no more data. Let's set that aside. It's almost like the data is too much to comprehend, right? It's like this is affecting our lives so much that we can't even get our brains wrapped around how big of a deal this technology is and is becoming. What I want to do today is I want to talk and think and ask questions about our phones. Now, some of the stuff I got from this here book that I read not too long ago, it's called 12 Ways Your Phone is Changing You. And it basically describes, and there's a lot more in here than I can talk about, but it describes all of the sociological and physical changes that are happening to humans based on this new thing, which is relatively new. I mean, smartphones to be in most people's hands has only happened really within the past 10 years. So it's changing our lives. It's so new and it's such an unprecedented rate that it's worth our while to think this through, I think. So let me share 3 ideas that I got from this book. Like I said, there's a lot more there. If you want to read, go for it. Idea number 1 about phones is that smartphones addict us to distraction. Smartphones addict us to distraction. Here's one way to think about that. A lot of the smartest people in the world are getting paid an awful lot of money to work in Silicon Valley to develop apps and platforms that are going to grab our attention, right? They make more money the more of your attention that they get. And so what they do is they figure out ways to most likely distract you from whatever else it is that you might want to do otherwise. And so they're addictive because there's a lot of money going into causing these things to be addictive to us. The research and also my observation has led me to believe that this has resulted in more anxiety and more depression. And you especially see this among young people. It's also resulted in less sleep and less ability to concentrate. Here's a question worth pondering for y'all, and I can guess that in your brains, maybe you're thinking, yeah, these dumb phones, they're always distracting me. Do the phones distract us, or do we set it up so that we feel good when they distract us? Right? That's worth thinking about. Number 2, smartphones lead us to ignore people. Smartphones lead us to ignore people. And so I stand here as phone man to my kids, and I'm guessing that everybody here has had some experience where you're communicating with someone, and for no reason, like it doesn't even buzz or anything, they pull out their phone and start looking at whatever it is on their phone, and you're left standing there like, what am I, chopped liver? Because their phone is more important than you are. Maybe that person was me. There's a study that's fascinating that says even if you're in a meeting with people and you set your phone face up on the table that you're meeting with, folks still interpret that as the fact that you care more about whatever's going to show up on that screen if you get an alert than you do about the task or the people around you. And so smartphones lead us to ignore people. And my question is, we could all say that phones and the internet has allowed us to be more connected to other people. But the question that I want to ask is kind of at what cost, like is that a superficial connection at the cost of a deeper relational connection with other human beings? Number 3, smartphones reveal our quest for immediate approval. Smartphones reveal our quest for immediate approval. We all want, and this makes perfect sense, some amount of love and attention from other people. But what happens, especially on platforms where you can send out a message from one person to lots of people, is that you can then quantify how many people liked or commented on or responded in some way to whatever you sent out. And what this results in is this dynamic where you can always hope to get more people responding to whatever you do. And so I would say that I think that any sense of approval or love from people is never fully satisfying, because it could always be more than what you actually get. It could always be bigger. Another thing that happens is this. Online, generally speaking, what we do is we connect with people who are very much similar to us. So we find people who have our particular hobbies or beliefs or whatever, and we connect with those people who then affirm whatever it is we believe or like to do or whatever. And this results in a challenge, because we don't have to come face to face with people who are as different with us. And so we struggle to relate to people who are unlike who we are. Those are just some of the 12 challenges that are talked about in this book. Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to talk about what the Bible prescribes as some principles that we can use to think intelligently and to think wisely and theologically about these guys. Right? So what does the Bible say? And certainly Jesus did not walk around with an iPhone, but it's no surprise that they exist now. It was no surprise to Jesus that they exist now. And if that's the case, then the principles that the Bible offers us ought to be able to help us with this stuff, technology, and how we deal with it now. Okay, so I got three principles. The first one is this. Cell phones or smartphones or technology as a whole does not cause evil, it only empowers it. It does not cause evil, it only empowers it. Let's look at a passage in Mark chapter 7. Jesus is going to be talking here about food and its relationship to sin. So food and sin. In Mark chapter 7, here's what Jesus says. There's nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him. There's nothing outside a person that by going into the person can defile him. But the things that come out of a person are what defile him. Things that come out are what defiles him. It goes on later to say, what comes out of a person is what defiles him. For from within, out of the heart of man, come evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, and then it goes on to list a bunch of other stuff. Here's basically what Jesus is saying. He's saying you can't blame your sinfulness on the food that you ate. Very similarly, this is why the sledgehammer solution is not viable. We can't all take our cell phones and demolish them and say, look, all of our problems are gone, because we still have sin wrapped up in our hearts. And so you can't blame the sinfulness on the phone. Phones don't cause sin. Sin starts when we have kind of an unhealthy desire in our heart, like the list that was given there, and then we enact on that desire. Now here's where the phones do come in, though. Because when you have a phone at your fingertips, you have the most intricate and well-connected technology to then enact your sin in a way that is kind of more far-reaching and in some senses more powerful than what humans have had in the past. So because of the phone, the sinfulness that we want to do can become more impactful in a negative way. Let me try to illustrate this. So we're in the heart of Mifflin County, which means that my guess is most of you have knives and guns in your houses. I know I do. And the idea is both a knife and a gun, that those are harmless things as long as you go to them with the accurate purposes, right? So you have your knife and you grill a really good steak, and that's good, and you're going to use that knife to cut it up. And if deer season rolls around, you got a 30-30 or whatever, and you're ready to get some venison for your family, or whatever the case may be. Now, it takes an evil intent to use those things for harm, but you could argue that when there is an evil intent, one of those things has more far-reaching implications, or has more kind of ability to destroy than the other. This is what I'm saying about cell phones, is I think, without us even necessarily recognizing it, because remember, we swim in the water of technology, so we don't even notice it, but I think technology is very, very destructive, and we're not even stopping to recognize this. Cell phones are capable of taking our sinful actions, and in my experience, especially working with teenagers, doing more harm than quite possibly weapons themselves. All right, here's the second biblical principle. It's relatively simple. It's this. As believers in Jesus, followers of Jesus, we are supposed to have a Christian worldview. And what that means is kind of like this sermon series, that everything in our lives would connect to our relationship with Jesus. Here's how Colossians chapter 3 starts as a way for Paul to describe what I'm saying here. So Colossians 3 starts this way. Paul says, "If you then have been raised with Christ, seek the things that are above, where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Set your minds on things above, not on things that are on earth. For you have died, and your life is hidden with Christ in God." So Paul's very plainly saying, if you're going to follow this thing, if you're going to be wrapped up with Christ in God, you should set your mind on things above and not on earthly things. Now, a few of you are probably thinking, well, I'd like to eat something for lunch this afternoon, so am I allowed to think about, that's like an earthly thing, like, can I think about that sort of thing? Or can I think about my work? Or what does it mean if I can't think about earthly things? Well, here's what Paul says. So later on in that same passage, he says, "Put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you." And this is the kind of thing he's saying that is earthly. He says, "Put to death what is earthly in you, which is sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, and covetousness, which is idolatry." So my question is kind of this. Do smartphones or cell phones or this kind of technology, do they make things like sexual immorality, impurity, passion, evil desire, covetousness, which is idolatry, do they make them more accessible to us than not? And I'm not saying, kind of like the gun versus knife analogy earlier, I'm not saying that the phones cause us these things, but they cause the temptation for these things in a way that we need to really think about. For example, Jesus says, Paul says, "Put to death what is therefore earthly in you," and one of those things is impurity. Well, it does, to pull out one of my favorite phrases, it does not take a rocket scientist to realize that with cell phones, they make the idea of kind of sexual impurity much more at folks' fingertips than what it has been necessarily in the past. And I don't know the details, but I do know the stats. And the stats say that there's plenty of people in this room right here that struggle with the idea that this device that they carry around with them wherever they go always makes those kinds of, that kind of impurity possible. And so it's, I think about Job, right? Job, they say, is one of the earliest time written books in the Bible. And Job says, "I made a covenant with my eyes not to look lustfully at a woman." Well, what would Job be able to do today if he also had to carry around this kind of thing and deal with that 24/7? And so I'm confident that this is not a small thing, that this is a big thing, that lots of people are facing on a very regular basis, but it's not even the only challenge that we face in dealing with how to have a cell phone and be a Christian. Here's a couple more. Number one, we covet others. We covet others. So my experience with phones and kind of the, particularly say Facebook or these kinds of things, is that what it does is it makes everybody else's life seem desirable because maybe we covet their possessions, but it's not just that. We might covet their happiness, their family, we might covet their marriage, we might covet their wisdom, whatever it is that we covet from these other people. But what happens is we're coveting something that they're only presenting as an impression of their actual life. And so what happens is we're wishing that we had the life of some other person that we don't even know what their real life is actually like. We're just coveting the presentation they're giving on Facebook of their life. Number two, we waste time. So in this passage in Colossians, Paul's describing, he says, put your mind on things above, not on earthly things. I think it's awfully difficult because of just the fact that this thing is trying to distract us 24/7. So whenever we have a free second to put our mind on things above, maybe we do some online shopping. Maybe we're checking the news, checking the sports. I mean, there's 1,000 things that our phones are calling us to do whenever we could be taking some time to put our mind on things above. Thirdly, we rest poorly. We rest poorly. Now, I said it in the Sermon on Work, and I said it in the Sermon on Sleep, that generally speaking, folks are not resting very well. Well, my experience with at least my phone is that it has this thing where it tempts me to think that I'm resting when I'm not really. In other words, because I'm sitting down and not, out digging a hole or running a mile, because I'm sitting down, I feel like I'm at rest, but because the screen is always active and my brain is always engaged, I'm not actually resting. And so it pulls us away and it causes us to have these times where we're not able to just be, like humans have been able to do in the past. I can see on your faces, I've been thinking about this for quite a while. It can almost be overwhelmingly kind of depressing just thinking about all this. And so I have a third biblical point, which is a positive. So just, you can change your mood for 1 second. A positive thing about phones before we wrap up. So here's how Paul describes how much he cares about sharing the gospel of Jesus with other people. Here's what Paul says about that. He says, this is from 1 Corinthians 9. Paul says, to the weak I became weak, that I might win the weak. And then he goes on to say, I have become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. Become all things to all people, that by all means I might save some. So, in other words, he goes on and says, I do it all for the sake of the gospel, that I might share with them in its blessings. So what Paul's saying there is that basically, I am so excited about sharing the gospel that I'm willing to do anything. As long as it doesn't go against God, I'm willing to do anything. Like, I'll change, I'll adapt, I'll adjust, I'll do whatever needs to be done to share and to spread this gospel. Like, the good news of Jesus is so good that I'm willing to do whatever. Well, as I said earlier, these guys are the most intricate technology that human beings have ever created. Now, there might become something even fancier in the future. We don't know what that would be. But for now, not this particular phone, because a lot of your phones better than this one, but phones are the most intricate and powerful way that we have of reaching other human beings. And what this means is if we're going to be willing, like Paul, to be all things to all people, but by all means we might save some, we have the opportunity to use technology, because it's powerful, to share and spread the gospel. Now, I have an example of this. So, Ing had this friend from when we lived in Philly. Her name's Jess. I think she lives now in Louisiana. And we hung out when we lived in Philly together. And Jess and I became friends on Facebook. And so each month I've seen on there that what Jess does through Facebook is this. She puts out a thing on her, whatever, post on her wall, which says something along these lines. It says, I don't know if you believe in Jesus or if you don't, but if anybody out there is struggling for whatever reason, and you need someone to talk to or someone to pray for you, please send me a direct message, and I'd be glad to commit to praying for whatever that is in your life. And I thought, what a fascinating way to use technology, right? To put that message out there that doesn't say, I'm a Christian and you aren't, and so you're an idiot, or I'm a Christian and this world's going down the tubes, and I don't care if it does. Basically, what she's saying is, I care about you and I want your good, and I go to God in prayer, so if you want to talk to me about that, let me know. I'll be glad to pray for you. And I thought that's such a cool way to take technology and use it to spread the gospel. Like I said from the beginning, I'm still working through all this, right? It's cell phones and smartphones in particular are such a new thing that is radically transforming our world that we just don't even know yet how much or why or how they're impacting people the way they are. But I know I have a whole bunch more questions about this, so I thought instead of giving you application, here's what to do, what I want to do is at least welcome you into the same questions that I'm wrestling with. So I'm going to share a couple with you now. Question number 1 is, how would Jesus use a smartphone? How would Jesus use a smartphone? So if you've been here with us and you've been reading through the New Testament along with us, you have a sense of this person Jesus, and he came into a particular time in the world which was right and good. But if he came into this time and he had the opportunity to use a phone, how would Jesus manage his life with a smartphone? Question number 2 is sort of related but different. It's this. How will smartphones be used in eternity? Now, welcome into my crazy brain. But I think culturally we have I've said this before, we have a very unhealthy view of eternity, which is basically clouds and harps and chubby angels. So I don't know why those 3 things are the defining characteristics of heaven. But the question is, there's nothing scripturally that says that smartphones would not exist for eternity. Right? We have them now, there's nothing that says that they wouldn't. And if that's the case, then how would they be used then? Because maybe that can help us to figure out how to use them starting now. Number 3, how can smartphones be used to exalt Jesus and to spread his gospel? Like I said earlier, I'm convinced they're real powerful things. They're well connected. There's a lot we can already do with them. There's probably even more coming. The question is, how can we use them to exalt the name of Jesus? 4th, is there a time when we should not have our phones with us so that we can focus on God without distraction? In other words, is it a realistic thing to set up your phone? A few of you are thinking, well, there are some times where I lost my phone in some water or the battery keeps going dead. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is it worth our while to intentionally set up our lives to have some time where we can focus on God without the opportunity to be distracted by our phones? I'm just asking the question. Okay. I regularly think about how awesome Jesus is. And here's one way to think about that. Jesus was a relatively poor guy wandering the area of Palestine 2,000 years ago, kind of from not a huge fancy family without a lot of wealth. He lived on earth about 33 years, of which about 3 years of those 33 he did ministry. And yet, every person, whether they're a Christian or not a Christian, everybody who thinks about this kind of stuff would say that he made more impact in those 3 years. No cell phone, no technology, none of that kind of stuff. He made more impact in 3 years than any of us are likely to make in our lifetime with all this stuff at our fingertips. And so the question becomes, what are we using our time, or how do we get this stuff, right? I know Jesus was God incarnate, so I'm not denying that. But I'm saying that still, somehow in his life, he made the biggest impact in the world, and my belief is that it's because he mixed love and truth together so well, better than any of us generally do, that his impact still reaches all of the world today, right? More people than that are checking Facebook daily. And so my question for us as we go forward is basically like, I don't want to say phones are right or wrong or good or bad, how, whatever. I don't want to talk about that at all. What I want to talk about is how are we becoming like Jesus so that our lives are going to impact the world in the ways that he did, kind of separate from our ability to use the technology itself. All right, let me pray. Heavenly Father, I thank you that you have put us here on your earth. Thank you that nothing surprises you. So you're completely aware of the fact that we're going to get cell phones, and we're probably going to get some other stuff that's even fancier. Can't even wrap our brains around that right now. And yet, I also know, Lord, that you, there's something more important than technology. The technology, as helpful as it can also be very, very destructive. And what really matters is that our hearts are connected to you, filled with your love and your grace. And so we're motivated by love of God and love of others. I pray, Lord, that you help us to find ways to use technology for good, but also warn us or help us to at least pause and stop and think through what could be unhealthy or unhelpful that is forming our lives in ways that we don't even stop to recognize. And I pray that all this will be done so that Kish is a church here in Mifflin County where folks say, don't focus on what we do or don't do with technology itself, but can see that we're people that are transformed by the love of Jesus, and that there's something kind of in the stuff in our hearts that is desirable and glorifying to you. I pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen.